This edition of MacVoices is supported by you, our viewers and listeners, through our Patreon and PayPal sponsorship options. To learn more, visit macvoices.com/support. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. This is part 2 in our conversation with Jeff Carlson about his latest Take Control book, Take Control of Managing Your Files. In part 1, we focused on the macOS and file management there. This time, we delve into file management for iOS and iPadOS, as well as discuss some general options for storing your documents in the cloud, whether you want to or whether it might not be such a good idea. So let's go right back to the discussion with Jeff. We usually don't talk that long as we introduce new Take Control books, but this one I think is an exception because pretty much everything we've been talking about right now is Mac. And we haven't even touched on iOS and iPadOS. And I definitely want to get into that because that is sort of a whole different thing because we have now a Files app that is specifically dedicated to doing some of this. The interface concepts are completely different. So how do we go about either taking our Mac system and moving it over to those devices, or integrating those devices in with our Mac system, or do we just have multiple different systems here?
Well, it's part of the calculus when you get started at the beginning of this book. Like, one of the big questions that it asks is, all right, do you need to share files with an iPad or an iPhone? And the answer to that really kind of, forks a different path because you need to be able to sync things through iCloud or Dropbox or what have you. And there are little quirks, like, for example, the Files app. You can add a bunch of different services. So the Files app can look at your Dropbox folder or your box.com folder or whatever. You can access all of those files in the Files app. Of course, you could also do it in the Dropbox app, but we're trying to be sort of central here. But some things don't really apply. So, for example, one of the great things about the Files app is you can mark something as a favorite. And so it shows up in the little Files app sidebar. And that's wonderful because typically with the Files app, because it is a hierarchical folder system, you'd have to tap and drill down through. The problem is that only seems to work for things that are in iCloud Drive. So although on my iPad, for example, I can go to Dropbox in the Files app, and I can say, I want my Take Control folder to be a favorite. And it will let you favorite it. And then that will show up in the sidebar. But that won't sync to the other devices. And at some point, it goes away. So it's only with iCloud Drive files and folders that works. It's also like tags are also another example. If you want to really use the Files app heavily, tags really pay dividends in that because it's very focused on being able to find things using tags, but only if you're using stuff in iCloud Drive. So I think part of what I found writing about the Files app is sort of knowing what its limitations are and being able to work around that.
Okay. I'm processing because I'm thinking of different things I want to make sure we ask here. So the book on the cover, it specifically says macOS, iOS, iPadOS. So do we have any significant differences between iOS and iPadOS when it comes to file management, other than just obviously a larger screen to work with?
No, it's mostly just like little interface things. Like, for example, with iPadOS, a lot of the commands are are words. With iOS, they're images. So like you tap the organize folder versus the move button or something like that. Listing them separately is more just to be more accurate. What's nice is, with the Files app in iOS and iPadOS, like they have the same functionality. It just sometimes looks a little bit different.
Okay. Just got to ask, because since Apple has forked those two OSs, I know that right now they're still very similar. I have to wonder at some point how much they are going to change. It's.
Well, the thing that comes to mind as the main sort of iPadOS change is just that capability where, let's say you want to copy or move some files from one folder to another. In iOS, you pretty much have to like select them and choose copy and then navigate to the next thing, and paste them there. With the split view mode in iPadOS in the Files app, you can basically have sort of two instances of the Files app running side by side and just drag your items from the left hand pane to the right hand pane to go from one folder to another. So that kind of makes things a little bit easier that way, but it's also a conceptual thing that's not at all obvious. Like you have to know that, I can have two windows of the Files app showing me two completely different things. Yeah, you can, and you can drag things back and forth between them. It's absolutely non-obvious unless you know that it exists.
But it's not unlike a Mac. It's just that up till now we haven't had that capability on the iPad, and so that OS is evolving just like the Mac OS has evolved and continues to evolve.
Yeah. But it's something that because of the very modular way that iOS and iPadOS works, your default thought is, okay, I have opened an app, and the app takes over the entire screen. And so here I am in the Files app, and here I am, like it's taken over my whole screen. It's not intuitive to think, I can just do another Files app screen, because that's just not the way most things are done in iOS. So, recognizing and hopefully for some people, if they're, working on an iPad more than a Mac, or maybe it's their primary machine or something, if they didn't know that they could do that sort of, copying between apps, or, open the Files app on one side, open Pages on the other, drag your image from one to the other so that you can add an image to your report. It's so much easier than trying to, import an image and navigate the, an open dialog or something like that.
Okay, this one may get a little dangerous, but because there are two parts I want to ask about. First of all, you mentioned how Keynote, Pages, and Numbers are the same way. That if you are using Apple's version of collaboration, they sort of have to stay where Keynote, Numbers, and Pages put them, in order to be able to open them and know that that's where they're going to be.
Yeah.
How do you reconcile that with using other filing methods or files outside of those particular programs and that method of collaboration? Is it still as simple as opening, let's say, Keynote on one side and the Files app on the other, because they are living sort of in different ecosystems?
Well, kind of. I mean, what's nice is that with Keynote and Pages and Numbers, Apple basically sort of built the support for the Files infrastructure into them. So where before everything was saved in their own little siloed containers. And there's still a lot of apps that do that. Like you save a document. Excuse me. You save a document in a file, and it gets stored in that application's little storage space. And maybe you'd have to use like a share command to get it out of there to somewhere else. With Keynote, for example, when you open a new Keynote file, it basically gives you like a Files app interface, so you can navigate where you want. So what's nice is you no longer have to have that Keynote file in the Keynote folder in iCloud Drive. So you can actually put that wherever you want that's accessible. So let's say I have like a project folder in iCloud Drive because I want it on all my devices. And but in this case, I do want all the files together. So I could have a Keynote file and a Pages file and a Numbers file all in that same folder, and it would still work because within Keynote, you could navigate to that folder. The trick is if you're going to collaborate with somebody so that they can work on that file at the same time, then it has to be in the Keynote folder in iCloud Drive. So I don't know if I answered your question, but it's I mean, what's nice is the Files app is not just an app. It's really that infrastructure of, okay, here's how we can have apps on iOS and iPadOS more logically and more efficiently share with one another. I have a diagram in the book that basically shows like 4 different apps, and you can't necessarily move things from one app to the other just because of like the way they're sandboxed, but it can go through the Files app. And some of that, I mean, if you have like a Keynote on one side and Pages on another, and you have an image in Pages that you want to drag into Keynote, like you can do that, but I think under the hood, it's kind of following that route of Pages and that structure.
Right.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
And you may have already partially answered this, but when we started the interview, you said that you keep most of your files in Dropbox. So, yeah. I mean, first of all, that's great because that means that you've got automatic backups should anything happen. But yeah. more to the point for this discussion, though, why not iCloud? Or well, yeah, go. Yeah, well, I mean, let's start with that. Why are you using? Because let's do it this way. I feel like a lot of us learned how we think. We learned how cloud computing works by using Dropbox. That you put it there and it goes up, and it's just like the file system on your Mac. It just happens to be stored up there. Then iCloud came along, and it, at least at the start, it didn't work exactly that way. And I think that may have been why it didn't get as much of an uptake as it could have if it had just worked more like something we understood. So now let's bring it back. Does it work enough like that, or do we really need to learn a new way of thinking to share the files using iCloud between our devices?
I think that it mostly works. iCloud Drive mostly works that way. So honestly, the reason all my stuff is in Dropbox is just because I've had it in Dropbox before iCloud Drive existed. So it has some features that I use where I can share a file and give somebody a link instead of actually sending them the file. Things like that. Like that's just sort of my ingrained behavior because that's how I've done it for quite a while. You could absolutely set it up so that you have your project files in iCloud Drive and do that as long as it's as long as you know where it is, and again you're consistent about where things are. There's some, I touch on this a little bit in the book. There's some exceptions where, for example, if you turn on the option to optimize Mac storage, that makes it so that some things in iCloud Drive are no longer on your Mac. And the way that works is, so basically, once you do, say, iCloud Drive, you activate that, the cloud becomes the canonical version of your files. And when you're using an iOS device or an iPadOS device, you're just sort of pulling things down as needed. So it's not copying everything to your device that you have in iCloud, because that's kind of an inefficient use of the limited storage on your device. On the Mac, typically we have more storage space, and therefore it's not really that big of an issue. If you don't have a whole lot of storage space, you can turn on Optimize Mac Storage, and what that does is it you basically have like a little stub, a little thumbnail of files. So when you look at the directory, it looks like all the files are there, but behind the scenes, the actual file has been deleted to make room for something else. And then if you need that file, you go to open it, and it's just downloaded as needed from iCloud. So it's, it's one of those like, oh yeah, well, this works exactly the same unless you do this one thing. Another great example, there's a whole section in the book that talks about, optionally, you can have your documents folder and your desktop folder synced with iCloud Drive. It's not turned on by default, although I think, I know of people who, when they upgraded to some recent macOS version, it said, hey, you can do this. And during the setup, they said, okay, that sounds fine. And then one of the practical results of that is your desktop folder and your documents folder are no longer in your home folder. They're in a separate iCloud Drive folder. And so you have to figure out, okay, where does that go? And if you try to merge, if you do the same thing on, let's say, another Mac that you have, so that all of your desktop files can be together, it actually puts it in a separate subfolder. So there are always little exceptions like that I talk about.
And that's something I was going to ask you, so I'm glad you got to it. That I think the last couple editions of the Mac OS have that option. Do you want to store your home folder and your desktop folder in iCloud? And if you're not careful, and that sounds negative. It's just it just may not work the way you think it's going to work. It can be very advantageous, or it can be not so much, depending on what you are trying to accomplish. So.
Yeah, it's totally a thing of, know what you're getting into before you do it, if possible. Because, as one easy example, the documents folder tends to be kind of a catch-all for all sorts of things. And, there's some people who they'll just put everything in their documents folder and sort of use that as their base, because it's kind of, documents is generic enough that it can kind of be anything else. It's not your pictures folder. It's not your movies folder. And so, you can have a whole bunch of stuff there that you're like, yeah, I absolutely want to have access to this on my iPad. Well, there are some developers who also use the documents folder. So if you have, say, a Parallels desktop virtual machine, that can be created in the documents folder. And that sounds great and convenient until you realize that now you're syncing a multi-gigabyte file that is no problem at all on your internal hard drive, but because it's in your documents folder and that has been set up to sync with iCloud Drive, you're having to transfer 2 gigabytes of data or more. And depending on how it's set up, if you just make one change, that entire file has to be resynced. And so suddenly you're like, oh, how did I hit my bandwidth cap this month so quickly? Well, that's why, because you opened Windows once in a virtual machine, and so like it's those sort of consequences that aren't really communicated well when Apple says, hey, you can have all your files. Like, well, yeah, but what does that mean? Like, all my files includes this giant database that's been sitting here for 12 years. I don't necessarily want that to go up there, not because it's not data I don't want to, but because it's just going to impose a bandwidth load or a processing load or some other consequence.
Yeah. And that's become especially true now because there's almost a public service announcement on that score that a lot of us look the way Comcast is talking. If you have Comcast, it sounds like they're going to implement their bandwidth caps across the board early next year. And that could turn into an issue with trying to do some of these things. I know I work with a lot of video files, which are very, very large. Jeff works with a lot of photo files, which are large enough. And so, you could, if you don't have the bandwidth or you don't, bandwidth as in speed, bandwidth as in data transfer amounts, you can have a lot of issues. So these are things that you need to pay attention to. And it's nothing to be scared of. And again, that's why Jeff wrote the book. Go get the book, and you'll not only will you understand it, you'll kind of know what you should and shouldn't do for your situation. Yeah,
exactly.
Jeff, this is a 1.0 book, so this is a brand new book.
Yes, brand new. Everything new.
Everything new. What kind of pricing do we have for it?
It's $12.99. Runs 126 pages, I think. It's Take Control, so it's an ebook, and it's available in PDF or Kindle versions or Apple Books versions. And it was a lot of work, and I think there are many areas that it can be expanded into. I look forward to hearing from readers to say, but did you think about this, and what about this? And just because everybody's workflows are so different, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of different questions and clarifications, and more stuff that can be added in the future.
I want you to come back and talk about what you hear back from readers, because there will obviously be revisions to the book, and I would love to know what the revisions are that come from readers.
Yeah.
Because I think not only is it's also how our heads work. If your head works one way, something that's going to work for you is not going to work for me. So that's why I was really anxious to talk about this particular topic. Because it's something we all do, and we've probably done some of what you've talked about to some degree, but there's still probably a lot that you can learn from Jeff in this book and from just examining what you do. So, Jeff, thank you. It's a blast as always. You need to write more books so we can talk about more books.
Yeah. Oh, it's been a busy year. Yes.
He says, "My God, please, no."
Yes. I have lots of books, and I enjoy writing books, so I have no intention of stopping.
Well, that's good. That's good. Well, the next time you finish one up, come on back, or just come on back anytime. I don't think we'll have any problem finding things to talk about.
Yes, we have several things.
Great. Thanks so much for the time. We'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. TakeControlBooks.com is where you want to go to get Jeff's book and to get the books from all the great Take Control authors. We try to talk to as many of them as possible here on MacVoices, because I still think this is one of the best sets of resources out there for anyone, new or old, Mac user, iPad user, iPhone user. So check it out. Until the next time, and as always, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you Mac Voices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.